Here we are. It's episode 22, and I'm Tom Marshall. Welcome back. I don't have a co-host today, so my guest is visible to all of you in YouTube land, and I'm going to keep him quiet until I introduce him, but he's there. And thanks for coming. So we've landed in March 97, but if you look around at where we landed, we're suddenly strangers in strange lands, because last episode we did was Amsterdam. The next one we're doing is Amsterdam. Today it's Germany. But let's get into it. But first, you've been enjoying this season of Undermine. If you've been enjoying it, please subscribe to Osiris Premium on Apple, where you get ad-free podcasts, bonus episodes, and more. And I prefer it when I can have a co-host tell you about these things. But today I'm going it alone. Well, not really alone. As I said, I've got an old friend with me, friend of the pods. Today, he's our guest, a return appearance. And I'm talking, of course, about Brad Sands, who is Phish's road manager during this entire Phish era that we've devoted this season to. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Thanks for coming back, man.
You ever need a co-host? I'm available.
I know. I think you sort of just dropped into the co-host slot. Those other
sure
guys
I'd be better than Benji. I can say that with confidence.
Those other guys should be worried.
Yeah.
I mean, you dropped into road manager slot. Like one guy took a break and suddenly he came back and you had his job.
Heismaned him right out of there.
So it's happened before there's precedent. So anyway, RJ and Benji, watch your back.
I think my favorite thing about doing these is the fact that I'm like, I go back and revisit these shows in a certain sense. And I remember this one vividly. It was a great show. Good times. The tour itself was like all those kind of Europe tours, except for the one in 98 when we did like Barcelona and Prague and Copenhagen. The rest of them all kind of blend together.
Right.
And you have to go, oh yeah, like Dublin was in June, not in February. And, so yeah.
I came over, that was the 98 one. I came over specifically just for Prague and Barcelona, but I had done the Prague before in 97. Which
I believe is where that Prague in 97 is where he got the D-Set Packnack shirt. That was from Prague. That was like the venue was selling them or something. They just gave us a bunch of them. It was like, oh, these are cool.
But so anyway, the last time you were here, we were in New Hampshire, and now we're in Germany. That was 93. This is 97. We finally arrived. This is kind of the destination, although fall 97 is the destination that our podcast has been headed for.
Right.
But this is important. This show is really important for kind of a lot of reasons. But I, like you alluded to, I was not here for this tour. But whenever I went over to Europe, and I think it was 3 times, you and I, well, you weren't on stage. So when you could, we had fun together, and it was amazing. And I'll never forget, especially I think a great tour was later this summer where we did Dublin, London, Austria, and Prague.
Yeah. I mean, I remember because the Dublin show, I think, was right after Bradstock, if I'm correct. I feel like, right? And the thing I remember the most about Dublin was I feel like when we got there, we were like, we were making all these U2 jokes in like the clubs, and like they were playing this horrible music. And we'd always go to these clubs in Europe and be like, this is great. It's so fun. And it's like this really bad like house music, Like,
Trey always made fun of that Sunday, bloody Sunday. Yeah. The second harmony, the Sunday, bloody Sunday. Yeah. He would do it over and over again ad nauseum.
I remember telling Mike that they should play New Year's Day at Big Cypress, and that it never really got anywhere. That's a great baseline,
Do you remember, speaking of Dublin, we've already gotten off base, but that's fine. Do you remember a passport snafu or a mini snafu? You'd already been in Europe with the band twice, if I'm counting right. So this was the 3rd time. And I remember you said,
because we did the Violent Femmes tour and then,
Okay. And so I remember just getting there on the bus, and I was like, organized. I had all my stuff, and you went around and you were collecting passports, because I think we were all going to be asleep on the bus as the bus took a ferry to from Dublin to the England mainland.
London. Yeah.
And you said it's very characteristic. You said something to the effect of, watch this, Paige will have his passport ready, and then the other 3 won't be able to find it. And sure enough, those guys
just plays out like constantly the whole time, like Paige always was, like you never really had to worry about Paige, like having it together, no matter what. And Trey for the most part, but like you're not going to find Paige going over the border with like something left in his toiletry kit, like some of the other guys. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. All right. So back to this particular tour. So this is winter, early '97, and Phish's first solo headlining European tour. So what are the challenges of touring abroad apart from?
Well, and it's funny because like the first time we went to Europe was I think it was the summer of '92, and we opened for the Violent Femmes, right?
Incredible.
And it was one of those, like, I mean, hey, they were awesome. They were a great live band, kind of, a really cool thing to be associated with, but their crowd was not into Phish. I mean, that's like the opening slots. Like the Santana crowd was a little bit better of a match, but not always. And so it was totally different because even back then it was like you had all the other, it wasn't open borders. So each place going was like a border check and all that. So, and the buses aren't as nice, and it's just the drivers are weird. And, we had this one bus driver who we figured out at like, they could, like, typically in an American bus, you put your luggage underneath the bus. In Europe, they're the underneath compartments, like the bus driver sleeps underneath the bus, basically, and then he has like the bay, and then we're always scrambling. They have these double-decker buses, and you're always scrambling to put your bag somewhere. And we had this driver, I think it was on that summer tour, not in this winter tour we're talking about, but he was like stealing bikes as we were like going along. And like, I opened the bay once and there was like literally like 10 bikes in there, like a homeless guy, So then at the end of the tour, like we took them out, like we like basically stole them back from him and just returned them to, wherever. I think he was pissed.
Wow.
But it was always just, that part of it was always kind of strange, and then the power is different. Yeah. So inevitably, like, pedals don't work, and it's a challenge, and especially at that level, because at clubs, it's not like you're doing an arena or a stadium tour. It's where everything's sort of taken care of.
Right.
You're kind of encountering these challenges daily. Plus, the first time we went to Europe, we drove a van, and you're in London, you're driving on the wrong side of the road,
I kept encountering, because I'm not a very skilled European traveler. So all this stuff was new to me. And one of the weirdest things that happened, that I couldn't conceive of how Santana in a touring capacity wouldn't know this, or his roadies. I could see how like Phish wouldn't know it, but we got to a place where we were, I think, playing in Italy. Again, this is the wrong tour, right. But it was a town square, and the trucks wouldn't fit. You guys had to hoof in a ton, and literally tons of equipment.
Well, in general, Italy is just, like great food, not the most together place to do a show. It's always kind of like that. But I remember, Italy in particular always had these like they would always do these gigs in these cool places like that. They didn't really have a lot of traditional venues because it's like the old country, literally. And it was always like that. It was like you just had to adapt, But
I remember Phish was, I remember Phish was entering sort of a different phase where they were getting a little bit popular, and they were getting they're getting some money, and they're starting to dress nicer. Like, I think they came back from Europe with Versace suits once. But
like silky Versace underwear. He thought they were so great. He was like so happy about them. It's like, they're so comfy.
But I think it's kind of funny because I didn't remember them really liking to indulge after a show in going out, especially clubs. And yet in Europe, it seemed like the promoters would take Phish and all the entourage.
And I think in Europe, it always felt like, you were meeting all these new different people. It wasn't the same, people you've been meeting. And in America, it was different. We liked it. We knew where we wanted to go. We had no idea in Europe, so we let someone take us, and I think it was just more of like, it felt like those tours always felt like you were on like a camp adventure or something when you were little, right? Like you go away and you're with your like 15 best friends, and you just kind of get into like shenanigans,
Yes,
and
totally.
it's sort of like, obviously not like totally like Phish and Trey's trip to Europe, back in the 80s, which, a lot of this stuff was born out of, but kind of along those lines,
Were you were you one of the worm riders?
I definitely probably rode on the back of the worm at least once or twice. But I remember even like Paige and I used to have the best times in these European cities. Like we'd go for these long walks, and he was working on the Sicket disc, and we would like sit down with and listen to these like mixes really loud on this tape deck, like sitting on like a square, like, you know, it was cool. It was just kind of like things you wouldn't do in Denver. You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's also surrounded by, 1,500-year-old buildings and churches. And and sometimes like,
I feel like Tom, Mark, remember the time you guys bet me on, we did like the water drinking contest that was like in Europe.
Oh yeah. What was that about?
Instead of drinking beer, we decided to have a water drinking contest. And then that culminated with me eating a playing card for like $1,000 or something.
I remember the band was betting, and they bet with like $100 bills. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like really stupid bets, and I was like surprised at how hard it was to eat a playing card.
I was actually pretty sure that I could drink maybe it was 2 gallons in one sitting or something.
Yeah,
but it didn't work. It did not work. So
fun. Anyway,
fun. And you're right. So that's kind of like the environment we're in, sort of mischievous. You're with your friends. It's kind of a camping trip. It's fun because you're not with the standard crowd. You're kind of away from home, and it's just,
and you're also like, you're going to these places that, like, at least like if to skip ahead to Hamburg, right? Like, like when you get there, the first thing you go is like, you try and find the Beatles place, which is this, like the Kaiserkeller, which was this club where the Beatles played in like 1960, and I remember we used to like joke that like Hamburg was like the Beatles version of Telluride, like they left London and went to Hamburg, whereas like Phish left Vermont and went to Telluride, and
that's perfect.
There's no photo of John and Paul carrying a keyboard across the street, but and you're also like, you run into like when you're in Amsterdam or particularly in Hamburg, they have like these, the red light district, this like thing, they call it the Reeperbahn in Hamburg, and you're walking up and down there, and it's just like girls in the window, and you're just like, this is crazy, this is insane that would never exist in America,
Briefly, 42nd Street was like that, but not completely
not
like that.
This. It's a whole nother level, so there's just a sense of trouble and danger around that, especially in Hamburg,
True.
So one of the things that was really funny on this tour, was after we played London, we went to Cologne, Germany. Cologne has this big, fancy old church, and it's like the hotel's across this bridge to Marriott, like right across the river. And we got there and we checked in at night, and we woke up, we went for a walk, and we came back, and there were all these, like, our buses pulled in. That's what we got there in the morning. The buses pulled in, and there were like thousands of girls there, right? Like young. And we were like, oh man, this is crazy. Like we were like totally thinking it was for like the Phish,
Yeah.
Yeah. And we get out there, like, who are they looking at us? Like, we were like, found out like it was the Backstreet Boys were actually touring. They were actually like popular in Germany before. This was before they became big in America. It was 1997. They were playing in Cologne the same night we were. And like, I mean, the hotel was crazy. And we're like, who the fuck are the Backstreet Boys? I never heard of that. And then like a year later, you're like, oh my God. Anyway, so
that's awesome.
Those are the kind of things that happen in Europe,
Yeah.
And I think before we got, because we did a bunch of German shows, and then we went back into like Italy, and then we ended up back in Hamburg sort of towards the end of the tour. I don't think it was the last show, but it felt kind of like near the end, right?
Well, yeah. Well, the reason this one's pivotal and it's kind of like where cow funk started in a way. So like fall of 96, they covered Talking Heads. And then here, just a few months later, it's almost like they went all the way to Europe to experiment with what would eventually be called cow funk. And
can I go on record as saying that is the dumbest name ever for
until today, I don't think I've used that more than 5 times in my life, but I think it's like a reference.
I know what you mean though.
Yeah. I mean, Trey would describe it as the band got into grooves more, but people labeled it cow funk. And I think the cow is from Vermont, right? That's the only way that I can. But anyway, the band has talked about how it was a breakthrough, and they even, did you feel, were you aware at the time as a pivot point, or did you see it at a crossroads?
I think like when you after the Halloween albums always sort of dictated kind of style and stuff, and because they would practice those for so long, and obviously the Talking Heads record is a very groove oriented record, and I think that they just wanted to lean into that direction after playing it. And they were good at it too. It was great to see Trey play more rhythm guitar, and be patient. There was a lot more patience in Europe because they were really the gigs almost to a certain degree, didn't matter, in a sense of we would go to Europe. That we were trying to break Europe, and all of us knew this is never going to happen. There's just no way, but it's fun, and, yeah, it was definitely, you could feel the band changing. I mean, even Billy Breeze I think they were supporting Billy Breeze at this point, because Billy Breeze came out probably in 96. And already by the time they got into this, they were, it was definitely not the kind of it was like a rebellion against Rift almost. You know what I mean? Yeah, I just think it was more relaxed and the guys could kind of do whatever. You're playing in Europe when they played in clubs. I felt like they just could connect with people and just kind of lose themselves. Whereas, when they would do underplays in the US, it's not the same. The show at the Fillmore in 98, it's just kind of blah,
I totally agree. And I think I definitely saw it. This is how I saw it. And it sounds like you too, and probably the band, just in a way, Europe was just sort of preparation or fun and prepared them for the upcoming next tour in America.
Yeah. I mean, they also just, I think the thing about Phish was, at least back in the old days, there's always all these talks about how the Betty Ford Clinic and all that went too far and all that. But what it did was it set this sort of, the band knew everyone was having fun. When they were in a fun environment, they played better,
Yep.
And I think that was part of it. Europe was fun. We were having a good time. We were doing renting scooters in Rome and basically almost getting killed. And you get to the gig and I'm oh my God, that was so fun. There was a lot of that going on,
Yep. Just being in a different place.
Yeah. And, but I think musically they were definitely changing. I think the Talking Heads record was a big part of that, and 97, 98 kind of with the Ghost record as well, really kind of catered to that kind of vibe,
Well, let's talk more about the music when we return after a quick break.
Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if your investments reflected what matters most to you? At Green Future Wealth Management, the advisors specialize in helping clients manifest their values in their financial lives. Green Future Wealth Management was founded by certified financial planner practitioner and longtime fan Nick Cantrell, named by Forbes as one of the top next-gen wealth advisors in the country. Whether you are just getting started or have complex investing and financial planning needs, visit them on the web at greenfuturewealth.com. You can sign up for the email list or take the Investing Values quiz. When you feel ready, schedule a free virtual consultation. In appreciation for the amazing Phish community and the incredible work being done by fans across the country, Green Future Wealth Management will be donating 10% of asset management proceeds from new Osiris listener clients to Fans for Racial Equity. Just be sure to mention Osiris when booking your appointment. Create your green future. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Inc., member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc. Cambridge and Green Future Wealth are not affiliated.
And we are back. Let's talk about the show itself. So these highlights, well, the highlights are highlighted on the official album Slip, Stitch, and Pass.
Yeah.
So the band at the time said they were releasing it to showcase this new breakthrough they had. And I guess this counts as their second live album, right? And this one was in my car. You know, I don't know if you know about me and my other Osiris brethren, but they listen to a lot of old Phish shows and I don't. But this one, because it was Slip, Stitch, and Pass, it was in my Ford Explorer. And every time I started the key, the CD started from the beginning. So I heard Cities, Wolfman's, and Jesus over and over and over. But great album. But they didn't do the whole show. It was just, they just did a selection.
I feel like it was almost like an antidote to what a live one was, right? Like a live one was like, I versions from all these different shows and like the definitive live album. And like, I don't know anyone who listens to it. It's not that it's bad or good or whatever. It just doesn't have the feel like this show does, you know? And I mean, the other thing that's of note, obviously, is the cover was done by the guy who did the Pink Floyd album covers.
Strom Thurgerson.
Yeah. And I remember like we were in London, I guess it was, one of these other tours later, probably later that summer or whatever. And, going to meet with him and just like, he did this, it cost so much money. And Elektra was like, cause he actually built that ball.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was just nuts,
When Phish does an album cover, like Round Room, they actually build the thing. For no reason. Someone could draw it.
Yeah. You got to do it. You can never go backwards. Right. And just even the fact that like, we got to work with that guy who, Animals and Wish You Were Here, all those great album covers that Pink Floyd had,
Incredible. Was he an old guy at the time? Strom Thurgerson?
He was old at the time.
Yeah.
So I think he passed away recently.
I'm not sure. But I do like the cover. A dude being chased by a ball of yarn. I'm not quite sure how it fits in with Phish.
Yeah. But I mean, it's funny, that show, I remember it because I think we'd had we went to the Reeperbahn the night before and just kind of were like, had fun, so to speak. But no one really did anything. That was kind of like, we would walk up and down and be like, oh, we'd probably try and goad like somebody into going in there, And I think eventually we may have goaded someone to go into one of the rooms.
I need initials at least.
Yeah, no initials. I won't say.
All right. Famous tracks from Slip, Stitch, and Pass, like Wolfman's, and then Mike's Groove. But in addition to that, there's a really interesting heavy metal Possum. And they did a lot of covers, actually 3 or 4 covers in that show, the Cities. And
if I remember, like they played Cities one other time because when I started working for them in 91, they had never played it. They played it once. And then this was like it kind of came out of nowhere. I don't even really remember them like rehearsing it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And, but it was like right in the middle. I think it was right in the middle of the first set, if I'm correct, but I could be wrong. But
you might be right.
They definitely put most of the best stuff on Slip, Stitch, and Pass. I mean, I think that was one of the first Wolfmans to kind of extend more.
Cities opened the show.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. It opened the show.
I know it opened Slip, Stitch, and Pass, but I thought maybe
it didn't open Slip, Stitch, and Pass. But
it did open Stitch and Pass, right? Yeah.
Great version though.
Yeah. I just felt like
sorry. Cities, Wolfman's, and Jesus Left Chicago is Slip, Stitch, and Pass. Cities also did open the show. So they were true in that regard.
Hold on. I feel like is that right?
I think it's right.
Hold on. I'm looking.
I have it now. Set 1, Cities, Okie Pa, Down with Disease, Way.
Yeah, it's funny. Right. That's right. Okay. Anyway, we had also, that was our second time playing there. I think we played there in the summer of 96 because we had done, when we played that tour with Santana, we'd done a couple solo shows within there, Anyway, the Wolfman's, I think, was the first extended one. The Cities was great. And the Mike's song is just one of it was definitely was like, it should be called Mike's album, like it's really like, he's kind of running the show and the whole thing, it's one of his great nights. And Mike Mike could have those nights, and usually like, you kind of expect Trey to be on, but when Mike is on, it's like, that's when Phish is the best, I think.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
In particular, that Mike song is just kind of, fun and kind of all over the place in a good way, and the Doors thing, which is, listening back, I remember when Page was doing Lawn Boy and he came walking out, and Phish said, he walked on down the hall. And I was just like, Phish always had that timing just to just hit it perfect, Do
you have any insight into the why the Doors were at the end of Mike?
I don't know. I mean, we were in Paris about a week before that. We played the place where all the Queens, not Queens, he
got arrested.
No, we played the place that the Bataclan was the place where the terrorist thing happened. We played there in '97. Funny story about France is there was this guy who was always this drum magazine guy that every time we go to Europe would interview Fishman, and the magazine was called Le Batteur, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he looked kind of like Fishman, and he would always show up and he'd have all these magazines, and, just kind of funny. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like we maybe like one of the other things we used to always do in Europe is we'd always go to like sort of the tourist places, or I mean, I remember you and Trey trying to get into the casino in like France. Remember that time? And the guy, like you needed like a suit.
I was woefully underdressed. I think Trey was okay. You and I were not.
No, I think he looked at us and said, "This is impossible." like because we said like, "Do you have like a jacket that we could just wear?"
No, absolutely not. No.
Yeah. And that was like like we went to like the beaches of Normandy. It was like in Deauville or something. But
this wasn't where you cut off the heads of the tourists in the photographs.
No, that was summer '98. That was when Tom Phillips was out there. That was Barcelona.
Yeah. Do you have any good memories of stuff that you guys did in the off days?
I mean, I'm trying to remember, like in this particular tour, it was actually kind of cold, Oh
yeah.
But I mean, I remember Europe. I mean, one of the best days off we ever had was we rented these scooters in Rome, and we all did it, right? And of course, it kind of was exactly how like the whole thing. Trey got the fastest one. It was like fucking taking off, And Corona was kind of right behind him and a little bit all over the place. And then it was like me and Fishman and Page were just like trying to keep up with those guys, And I remember like Fishman almost got hit by a bus. I mean, if you've ever driven in Rome, it's insane, But we literally covered the whole city, and it was just like the best day, And then we went to this like really cool Italian restaurant, and like I got like the fruits de mer pasta, and I asked for like some Parmesan, and the guy basically was like, "You don't put Parmesan cheese on seafood. What are you wrong?"
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, "Oh, sorry, I don't know."
Why do you think the band stopped touring Europe?
I mean, I think it just became like after that the one in '98. I think it just became like an obstacle to kind of wrap your head around. Like they already weren't touring that much anyway. And by later on in the years, like to spend one of those periods going over there, I don't know. I just think they don't really care,
It's probably a lot of money. Like commercially, they probably didn't make any sense, right?
It would definitely not. They would lose money, but
right.
I'm pretty
sure. The idea was to open up a new market. And so they went repeatedly for a while, and then they probably economically saw the numbers weren't working and stopped going.
We also saw it was just like basically in most cities, it was like American kids were coming over, or that lived in the city would come to the shows. I mean, in Italy and Germany, you would see some like Zappa people or whatever, some weird record type collector guys. But it wasn't like, it just wasn't work. It just wasn't going to work. But I think if they went over there now, they're such like an institution, they'd probably, they could probably play the O2 in London, I'm guessing, but who knows?
I'd like them to go back, and I know everyone would go, right? Everyone would follow them.
Yeah.
People are spending a lot of money to go to Mexico. And so this wouldn't be that much different.
No, I mean, it is logistically, it's just, like people would always say, "Oh my God, you're going to Europe. It's so fun." And like, yes, while we would have fun, it just touring in Europe, it kind of sucks.
It's got to be tough.
Unless you're like, the Police or something, those Europe tours were a little bit better.
You did a couple of those, didn't you?
Yeah. We would, I mean, the police and across, it's funny doing that as a tour manager. I was Stewart's tour manager. The police are big everywhere, not just America.
Okay. Right.
And, as it relates to Phish, they would because most of those guys had heard of Phish, but not really. And they would always make fun of me because I was like the kid that worked for this, they would post my resume all over the building,
Looking for jobs.
Then, I feel like I told this story maybe on the podcast even, but I tried to they asked me to play a Phish song on the plane, and I picked Taste. It's the dumbest. As soon as I put it on, it was like, this is so stupid. It sounded so I picked the wrong song.
Intellectual or something.
We're back. You might not have noticed it, but we just had a huge technical screw up. I'm now here alone with a new mic, and we lost Brad. But we were essentially at the end of the interview anyway. So I think I'll just thank Brad so much for coming on. Brad Sands, great friend of Osiris and Undermine. He's really just plug and play, isn't he? He doesn't really need an interviewer. He can just talk for a half hour and that would be fine. The knowledge he has as a legit insider who was there with the band for the entire 90s is unmatched. And we're so glad he's willing to share it with us now and then. I hope we covered the show enough. As I said, my knowledge of March 1st, 1997 was warped by having the Slip, Stitch, and Pass CD in my car for a long time. So I know a selection of the music from the show very well, but I wasn't in Germany and definitely enjoyed re-listening and hearing Brad's perspective. I'm going to wave to my co-hosts, Benji Eisen and RJB, and they were both suspiciously busy today and had to sit this one out. Also, thanks to the Undermine team at large, even though it's small, Matt, Eric, Nick, and Christina. And thank you to everyone out there in podcast land for joining us. Remember to review and subscribe wherever you listen or watch. We'll see you in a couple of days. If you feel like listening to the early July 97 shows from Amsterdam, please do. And until then, be safe and be careful hitching any rides on the backs of any worms. Auf Wiedersehen.
Osiris.